My name is Eleanor Vance, I'm 70 years old, and my own son and his wife tried to declare me incompetent to steal my home. Before I tell you how I took back everything they ever thought they had, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It all blew up, as these things so often do, on a day that was supposed to be about gratitude. Thanksgiving. The air in my home, the home my late husband Bob and I had built with our own two hands here in Oak Creek, Texas, was thick with the scent of roasted turkey and cinnamon from the apple pie cooling on the counter. The familiar, comforting sound of my family filled the rooms, the clinking of silverware, the low murmur of conversation, the occasional burst of laughter from my grandchildren Chloe and Leo, as they snuck olives from the relish tray. For 3 years since Bob had passed from a sudden heart attack, this was my life. My son David and his wife Jessica had moved in, insisting I shouldn't be alone in this big house. And for a while I believed it was a blessing. I thought they were my sanctuary. I was a fool. We were all seated around the dining table, the one Bob had picked out 30 years ago. 15 of us. A sea of familiar faces, cousins, my brother-in-law Tom, all of us passing gravy boats and butter dishes. I was just about to ask David about his recent promotion at the engineering firm when a sharp clink cut through the warmth. It was the sound of a fork hitting a plate with intention. Jessica's fork. She placed it down, perfectly aligned with her knife, and dabbed her lips with her napkin. Everything about her was polished, from her salon-perfect blonde hair to her sharp, manicured nails. She scanned the table, a small, cold smile playing on her lips, before her eyes landed on me. "Eleanor," she said, her voice clear and carrying across the suddenly quiet table. "I'm glad everyone is here to hear this, so there are no misunderstandings." A prickle of unease went down my spine. David shifted uncomfortably beside her. "David and I have been talking," she continued, her smile widening just a fraction. "And we've decided it's time to make some changes to the household finances. Your free ride is over." The words hung in the air, ugly and sharp. My brother-in-law Tom, who was halfway to his mouth with a forkful of stuffing, froze. I could feel every eye at that table turn towards me. I tried to laugh it off, thinking it was some kind of bizarre, tasteless joke. "Oh, Jessica, what are you talking about?" Her smile vanished. "I'm talking about rent. Starting December 1st, your room will cost $2,500 a month. We feel that's a more than fair market rate, especially with utilities included. $2,500. The numbers didn't even make sense. This was my house. My paid-off house. My breath caught in my chest. It felt like a punch to the gut. I looked at my son, my only son, pleading with my eyes for him to say something, to shut this down, to defend me. But David just stared intently at his mashed potatoes, swirling them with his fork as if they held the secrets to the universe. He wouldn't look at me. He couldn't. Tom cleared his throat. "Jessica, now hold on a minute. This is Eleanor's home. She's family." Jessica let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Family contributes, Tom. Family doesn't just sit around being a freeloading burden, while the rest of us work our tails off to pay the bills." A freeloading burden. That's what she called me. After 45 years of marriage, after raising 3 children, after sacrificing my own nursing career to support my husband's, after turning this house into a home filled with love and memories, I was a freeloading burden. The turkey in my mouth suddenly tasted like sawdust. My hands began to tremble, so I clasped them tightly in my lap, trying to stop them from shaking. The hurt was so sharp, so sudden, it was a physical pain in my chest. All around me, the family was a gallery of frozen shock, their faces pale, their eyes wide. They were all looking at me, waiting for me to cry, to break down, to protest. I looked at Jessica's smug, triumphant face. Then I looked at my son's bowed head, the cowardice radiating off him in waves. I felt something shift inside me. The initial shock and the deep, searing hurt began to cool, hardening into something else. Something cold and solid. It was anger, yes, but it was more than that. It was determination. I slowly, deliberately placed my own knife and fork down on the plate, the quiet click echoing the one Jessica had made moments before. I met her cold, challenging gaze across the table. I took one steadying breath, feeling the weight of 15 pairs of eyes on me. And then I opened my mouth to speak. "Before Jessica, this house was a symphony of life. My husband Bob and I bought this plot of land in Oak Creek back in 1985. It was nothing but sun-baked dirt and stubborn mesquite trees. He was a contractor, a man who spoke the language of wood and stone, and I was a registered nurse accustomed to the rhythms of life and loss. We poured every spare dollar and every waking hour of our weekends into this place. I remember bringing him lemonade in the blistering Texas heat, the smell of fresh-cut pine and his sweat mingling in the air. I remember the proud, exhausted smile on his face when he finally installed the big bay window in the kitchen. "So you can watch the Blue Jays while you drink your coffee, Ellie," he'd said. That window became my favorite spot in the world. We raised our 3 children here, David and his 2 older sisters, Sarah and Linda. We celebrated birthdays with badly sung songs, Christmases with a mountain of presents under the tree, and graduations with tears of pride. We paid off the mortgage in 2012. Bob threw a party, just the 2 of us. He grilled ribeye steaks, my favorite, and we opened a bottle of champagne we'd been saving. We danced on the patio under a blanket of stars, to the same old country song from our wedding. "This is our fortress, Ellie," he'd whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he held me close. "Paid in full. No one on this earth can ever take this away from us." He believed it. And so did I. When he died, the silence in this fortress was a physical presence. It was a cold, heavy blanket that smothered every room. Every creak of the floorboards was a ghost. So when David and Jessica suggested they move in, it felt like someone had finally opened a window in a suffocating room. "We'll take care of you, Mom," David had promised, his arm a comforting weight around my shoulders. "You shouldn't be alone." Jessica was a vision of warmth and sincerity back then. She'd hold my hand and talk about how much the kids, Chloe and Leo, missed their grandma. She spoke of the beauty of multi-generational living, of family taking care of family. I, drenched in grief and loneliness, drank it all in. I thought they were my sanctuary. I was a fool, blinded by gratitude. The first year was a gentle lie. I fell back into the comfortable, familiar rhythm of being a mother and grandmother. I made pot roasts on Sundays, helped Leo with his multiplication tables, and listened to Chloe practice her piano scales. I felt needed, useful. My purpose, which I thought had died with Bob, seemed to be rekindled. But gratitude can be a powerful blindfold, hiding the ugliest truths in plain sight. The change was a slow-acting poison, tasteless and odorless, administered in tiny daily doses. It began right after Jessica was promoted to vice president of marketing at her firm. Her salary doubled, and with it, her sense of entitlement swelled to monstrous proportions. Suddenly, our cozy, comfortable home wasn't good enough. It was dated. It lacked flow. I watched, helpless, as she began a systematic campaign of erasure. The warm oak cabinets Bob had built were torn out and replaced with sterile white ones that showed every fingerprint. The comfortable, worn-in armchair where he used to read the paper was donated, replaced by a sleek, uninviting leather monstrosity. She was stripping the house of its soul, of its memories of him. My room, of course, was left untouched, a shabby little museum of a bygone era. A constant reminder that I didn't belong in her new glossy world. Then came the comments, the little verbal cuts. A dramatic sigh as she sorted the mail. "Gosh, the property taxes just keep going up." An exasperated look when she'd find me in the kitchen. "I just wiped those counters down." Her voice, once warm, became brittle and sharp. She stopped calling me Mom. When speaking to David, I became your mother. It was a deliberate distancing, a verbal wall being built between us. I tried to talk to David to make him see. I'd catch him in the garage before he left for work. "David, is everything all right with Jessica? She seems unhappy." He would just shake his head, avoiding my eyes. "She's just stressed, Mom. It's a high-pressure job. Don't take it personally." He started working later, coming home after I'd gone to my room. He was retreating, vanishing into a fog of marital submission, leaving me to face her alone. He was shrinking right before my eyes, into a pale imitation of the strong, principled man his father had raised him to be. The true bone-deep chill came one night about 6 months before that fateful Thanksgiving. I'd come downstairs for a glass of water and froze on the bottom step. Their bedroom door was ajar, and I could hear their hushed, angry voices. "She contributes nothing, David. Absolutely nothing." Jessica's voice was a venomous hiss. "She just sits in that room using our electricity, taking up space that could be a home office. She's a financial black hole." Do you have any idea what we could be getting if we rented that room out to a professional? She's my mom, Jess, David had mumbled, his voice so weak it was barely audible. Where is she supposed to go? That is not our problem, she snapped. I'm your wife. This is my family now, my household to run. We have Chloe and Leo's college funds to think about, our retirement, our future. We can't keep hemorrhaging money and resources on someone who refuses to help herself. Hemorrhaging money? I paid for my own groceries. I paid my Medicare premiums. I paid for my car insurance and gas. I never asked for a single dime. But that simple truth had no place in the narrative she was carefully weaving. The narrative where I was a useless, expensive, freeloading burden. I backed away from the stairs, my hand pressed to my mouth to stifle a sob. My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. I told myself it was the stress talking, her new job. But deep down I knew better. It wasn't stress, it was strategy. And I was the target. The campaign to paint me as an incompetent, senile old woman was a masterpiece of insidious cruelty. It was a series of small, calculated acts of sabotage, designed to make me doubt my own mind. First, I fell for it completely. I started to believe I was just getting older, that my mind was slipping. It began with my cell phone. I live by that phone. It has my medication reminders, my doctor's appointments, my contacts for Sarah and Linda. I'd plug it in every night beside my bed, but 3 times in 1 month, I woke up to a dead battery. "Oh, Mom," Jessica would say, her voice dripping with feigned concern as she'd walk past my room. "You have to make sure the charger block is pushed all the way into the outlet. You missed your reminder for your cardiology check-in call." She knew that call was important. She knew it would make me anxious for days, wondering if I'd missed something critical. Then later, I'd hear her on the phone with one of her friends, her voice carrying down the hall. "I'm just so worried about David's mother. Her memory is really starting to go." A week later, I couldn't find my car keys. I was going to my weekly bridge game, a small joy I clung to. I searched the house for an hour, my panic rising. I was sure I had left them on the little hook by the back door, where I always did. Jessica watched my frantic search with a look of pity. "They're on the bookshelf in the living room, Eleanor," she said finally, as if speaking to a toddler. "You really need to start paying more attention." I had no memory of putting them there. For a terrifying moment, I wondered if she was right. Was I losing my mind? The incidents grew more brazen. One afternoon, I was in my room reading when I heard a sickening crash and a theatrical shriek from the living room. I rushed out to find my 10-year-old granddaughter Chloe, crying, and Jessica standing over a shattered glass of water, her face a mask of fury directed at me. "My God, Eleanor!" she yelled, her voice echoing in the large room. "I told you 100 times not to leave glasses on the edge of the coffee table without a coaster. Look at this mess." Chloe slipped in the water and could have been seriously hurt. But I hadn't been in the living room all afternoon. The last thing I'd had to drink was a cup of coffee in my own room. "Jessica, I didn't leave that there," I said, my voice trembling under the force of her accusation. "Don't lie to me," she snapped, her eyes blazing. "Who else could it have been? The ghost of your husband? You see, David?" she said, turning to my son who had just walked in, drawn by the commotion. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. It's escalating. She's not just forgetful, she's a danger to the children. She leaves the stove on, she leaves glasses out. What's next? Is she going to forget to lock the doors at night?" I stood there, speechless and shaking. It was her word against mine, and in my son's eyes, I saw that my word meant nothing anymore. He looked at me with that same infuriating mixture of pity and frustration, as if I were a misbehaving pet that needed to be managed. The final, most calculated move came just a month before that horrible Thanksgiving. I came home from my grocery run to find a pleasant-faced woman in blue medical scrubs sitting at my kitchen table, sipping coffee with Jessica as if they were old friends. "Eleanor," Jessica chirped, her smile so bright it was blinding. "Perfect timing. This is Susan. She's a home care assessment nurse from Golden Age Solutions. I was just so worried after the incident with the glass that I took the liberty of calling them. I thought it would be a good idea to have her come and, just have a chat with you. See if you might need a little extra help around the house." She said it so breezily, as if she were announcing she'd hired a gardener. The nurse, Susan, smiled at me, but her eyes were cold and clinical. They were assessing me. She started asking her questions, her voice gentle but firm. Do you remember what you had for breakfast this morning, dear? What is the full date today, including the year? Do you ever feel confused or lose track of time? Do you feel capable of managing your own medication schedule? A hot flush of pure, unadulterated humiliation washed over me. I was being interrogated, evaluated, and judged in my own kitchen, without my knowledge or consent. I answered her questions in clipped, monosyllabic tones, my voice tight with a rage I couldn't show. But I knew the damage was done. Jessica now had a third-party professional who could write a report detailing her grave concerns about my declining cognitive state. She wasn't just trying to make me feel unwelcome. She was building a case against me, brick by insidious brick, preparing to prove I was incompetent. The morning after the Thanksgiving ambush was cold and silent. The house felt heavy with unspoken words. David had already left for work before I came downstairs, a coward fleeing the battlefield. Jessica, however, was waiting for me at the kitchen table, a fresh cup of coffee in her hand and a look of grim satisfaction on her face. She didn't say good morning. She simply pushed a thick stack of papers across the polished granite countertop. Here's the rental agreement, she said, her voice crisp and businesslike. I suggest you read it carefully. I picked it up with a hand that I willed to be steady. The first page was a standard lease agreement, with my name listed as tenant and hers and David's as landlord. The amount, $2,500, was typed in bold. But it was the second page, the addendum titled House Rules and Regulations, that made the blood drain from my face. It was a document of pure spite, a list of humiliations designed to strip me of any remaining dignity. I read the clauses in disbelief. Clause 4A. Tenant shall not use main kitchen facilities, including stove, oven, or microwave, between the hours of 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. Clause 5B. Tenant is prohibited from having any non-family guests on the premises without 48-hour written approval from the landlord. Clause 7C. Common areas, specifically the living room and home theater, are reserved for landlord's family use during evenings and weekends. Tenant may use these areas on weekday mornings only. And the final insult, Clause 9A. For the safety and security of the household, tenant must be on the premises no later than 9 p.m., unless prior written arrangements are made. A curfew. She was giving me, a 70-year-old woman, a curfew in the house my husband and I had built. This is a joke, I whispered, the words feeling like sandpaper in my throat. It's a legally binding contract, she corrected me coolly, tapping a long red-painted nail on the signature line at the bottom. You have until December 1st to sign it and provide a certified check for the first month's rent and an equal amount for the security deposit. If you can't or won't, then you'll be considered a trespasser, and we will begin eviction proceedings. She leaned back in her chair, a predator enjoying her kill. I'd advise you to start looking into your other options. As I mentioned, Sunny Meadows Retirement Community is a lovely facility. I've already put your name on their interest list. They have wonderful activities. Bingo, I believe. It seems appropriate for your needs. I spent the next 2 days in a daze, a fog of grief and despair so thick I could barely breathe. The walls of my own home felt like they were closing in on me. I finally gathered the courage to call my daughters, my last hope for a lifeline in this drowning sea. First, I called Sarah in California. She was a high-powered executive, always busy, always stressed. Before I could even finish explaining the contract, she cut me off with an impatient sigh. Oh, Mom. I'm right in the middle of closing a big deal. Look, I know Jessica can be intense, but you have to see it from their perspective. David's first divorce was financially devastating for him. Jessica's salary is what's keeping them afloat in that big house. Are you sure you can't just pay them something? Even a little bit? It would probably smooth things over. Sarah, they're asking for $2,500 a month. I cried, my voice cracking. And a curfew. Well, maybe it's time to consider downsizing anyway, she said, her voice distant. Selling the house could solve a lot of problems. You could get a nice little condo. I have to go, Mom. I'll call you next week. The line went dead. Fighting back tears of betrayal, I immediately called my youngest, Linda, in Florida. Her reaction was a different kind of knife, one twisted with judgment. A curfew? Mom, you're probably exaggerating the tone. You can be a bit dramatic sometimes. Look, I have the twins screaming in the background and one of them has an ear infection. I can't deal with this drama right now. Honestly, maybe Jessica has a point. You are living there for free. It's their house now, legally or not, since they live there. You have to respect their rules. Their house. The words, coming from my own child, shattered the last vestiges of my hope. I hung up the phone, the silence in the room deafening. Every door I tried had just been slammed shut and locked in my face. My own children, the ones I had rocked to sleep in these very rooms, had cast their votes. I was a burden. I was an inconvenience. I was completely and utterly alone. Or so I thought. That evening the house felt like a tomb. The air was thick with Jessica's smug victory and David's cowardly silence. I couldn't breathe in there. I grabbed my car keys and just sat in my old Buick in the driveway, the engine off, the cold of the vinyl seats seeping into my bones. I stared at the warm golden light spilling from the windows of my home, a place I was no longer welcome. I felt invisible, erased. A soft tapping on the driver's side window made me jump, my heart leaping into my throat. It was my neighbor, Marge. Her white hair was lit by the porch light, and her face, usually so cheerful, was etched with deep concern. I rolled down the window. Eleanor, honey. What on earth are you doing out here in the freezing cold? I saw the moving truck the other day and then, well, the whole neighborhood saw that scene. And just like that, with that small act of kindness, the dam of my composure broke. The whole sordid, humiliating story came pouring out of me in a torrent of tears and choked words. The rent demand, the prison-like contract, the threat of sunny meadows, the gut-wrenching phone calls with my own daughters. I cried for my husband, for my lost son, for the woman I used to be. Marge listened to it all, her hand resting on my shoulder, not saying a word. When I was finally spent, hiccuping in the cold air, she didn't offer empty platitudes or tell me it would all be okay. She looked me dead in the eye, her own eyes blazing with a righteous fury that warmed me to my core. That conniving witch, she said, her voice a low, fierce growl. Eleanor, Robert Vance was a good man. A strong man. He would be spinning in his grave if he knew his wife was being treated like this. He would never, ever let anyone bully you. Especially not in his own home. This is your house, Eleanor. Your fortress. Have you forgotten that? Her words were a jolt, a defibrillator to my defeated heart. Bob. What would Bob have done? He wouldn't have cried in his car. He would have fought. But how? What ammunition did I have? And then, like a ghost's whisper on the cold night air, I remembered his last few weeks. He'd been weak from the illness that finally took him, but his mind had been as sharp as a tack. One afternoon, he had called me to his bedside and pressed a small, heavy, gray metal box into my hands. It was an old fireproof lockbox we'd had for years. Everything important is in here, Ellie, he'd rasped, his breath shallow. The deed, the wills, the insurance. This is your shield. Don't you ever let anyone take it away from you. The box. It had been sitting on the top shelf of my closet for 3 years. A forgotten relic of a life that was over. Or so I thought. Now, if you've ever felt completely and utterly backed into a corner, with no way out, you know that feeling when a tiny, impossible sliver of light appears. I need you to stay with me because this is where that sliver of light started to become a wildfire. Thank you, Marge. I whispered, my voice hoarse but firm. A new resolve, cold and hard as steel, was forming in my gut. I went back inside, walking past Jessica in the living room without a word. I went straight to my room, pulled a chair over to the closet, and retrieved the old metal box. It was cool and heavy in my hands, a solid piece of my past. I placed it on my bed, my heart pounding a nervous but hopeful rhythm. I spun the combination dial, the familiar clicks echoing in the quiet room. August 15th, 75. Our wedding anniversary. The latch popped open with a soft, satisfying click. Inside, everything was in perfect, meticulous order, just like Bob himself. There were folders labeled insurance, military records, wills. And there, right on top, was a thick manila folder labeled simply house. I pulled it out with fingers that trembled with a mixture of fear and hope. On top was the original deed to our home. My name, Eleanor Marie Vance, and his, Robert James Vance, were printed in official blocky type. And there at the bottom, stamped in purple ink by the Oak Creek County clerk, were the two most beautiful words I had ever read. Paid in full. A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled my knees washed over me. This was my proof. This was my weapon. This was Bob's shield. My name. Robert's name. Paid in full. But as I carefully placed the deed back, I saw another folder underneath it that I didn't remember. The label, written in Bob's neat, strong handwriting, made my blood run cold. Financial power of attorney. Why was that folder in the shield box? A financial power of attorney. My mind raced. Years ago, when I had a full hip replacement, I had signed a temporary medical power of attorney, giving David the authority to make healthcare decisions for me if I was incapacitated. But I never ever signed anything giving anyone control over my finances. Bob had always handled the investments, but since his passing, everything was in simple, stable accounts that I managed myself. The idea that someone else had power over my money was terrifying. With a sense of deep foreboding, I opened the folder. It was mostly filled with old, legitimate documents from when Bob was still alive, papers related to his pension, old investment statements. But tucked into the back, almost hidden between two thick pages of a stock prospectus, was a single crisp envelope I had never seen before. It was from a major national bank, and it was addressed to me, Eleanor M. Vance, at my address. The postmark was from 14 months ago. The envelope had been neatly slit open along the top. I never saw this letter. I never opened it. My mail was a small, predictable trickle. A few bills, some catalogs, and letters from my sisters. Jessica was the one who always brought the mail in from the box at the end of our long driveway. She'd sort through it at the kitchen island, creating a small pile for me. How easy would it have been for her to simply not include a letter? I carefully pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. It was a welcome letter, printed in cheerful blue ink. Dear Mrs. Vance, it began. Congratulations on your new Platinum Rewards Visa card. We are delighted to welcome you, and are certain you will enjoy the many benefits and privileges. Your card has been activated and is ready for you to use. I stared at the letter, the words blurring in front of my eyes. A Platinum Rewards card. I hadn't applied for a new credit card in over 20 years. My only card was a simple, no-fee card from my local credit union that I used for gas and emergencies. A cold, sickening realization began to wash over me. A slow, creeping tide of dread. This wasn't a mistake. This was intentional. I knew I couldn't confront her directly. She would lie, twist the story, and probably destroy any other evidence. I couldn't use the house phone to call the credit card company. For all I knew, she monitored the calls. I had to be smart. I had to be careful. The next morning, I put on my coat and told Jessica I was going to my weekly seniors yoga class at the community center. Don't strain yourself, she said with a dismissive wave, not even looking up from her laptop. Instead of turning right towards the community center, I turned left and drove straight to the main branch of my bank downtown, the one with the private offices. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely fill out the withdrawal slip I was using as a pretext. The teller, a kind-eyed young woman with a name tag that read Maria, noticed my distress immediately. Ma'am, are you all right? You look a little pale. Would you like a glass of water? The kindness in her voice almost made me break down. I think I might be a victim of identity theft. I stammered, the words feeling shameful and foreign on my tongue. Maria's expression instantly became serious and professional. Okay, she said in a low, calm voice. Let's go into my office where we can have some privacy. Inside the small glass-walled office, I told her about the mysterious credit card letter. I was careful not to mention my family situation. I didn't want her to think I was just a confused old woman making up stories. She listened intently, nodding and taking notes. Mrs. Vance, what you're describing is a serious crime, she said. Under federal law, you are entitled to a free credit report from all 3 major credit bureaus once a year. With your permission, I can help you access those reports right now. It's the first step. I nodded, my heart thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird. What we found on the screen was a horror show. It wasn't just one credit card. It was 3. The Platinum Rewards Visa from the letter, a Premier MasterCard, and a Gold American Express card, all opened within the last 18 months, all with my name and social security number. The total outstanding balance was a staggering $29,842. My life savings, painstakingly scrimped and saved over 50 years, amounted to not much more than that. I felt the air leave my lungs. Maria scrolled through the transaction histories. There were thousands of dollars in charges from high-end department stores I never set foot in. Charges from fancy restaurants where a single meal cost more than my weekly grocery budget. There was a $5,000 charge to a travel agency for a Hawaiian Paradise vacation package. And then I saw it. A series of charges to a high-end contractor for kitchen remodeling services. Jessica's new kitchen. My beautiful stolen kitchen. But that wasn't the worst of it. Maria scrolled further down the report, to a section called Credit Inquiries. These were records of who had tried to access my credit. There were 2 hard inquiries listed, both within the last 6 months. Both were from major mortgage lenders. Both were listed as application for home equity line of credit. And beside each one in red letters was the word denied. They hadn't just been running up my credit. They had been actively, repeatedly trying to borrow money against my house. My paid-off, debt-free home. They had tried to steal my fortress. The numbers on the screen weren't just debt. They were a story of a calculated long-term betrayal. I walked out of that bank, clutching the printed copies of those reports, not as a grieving widow, but as a detective in slippers. My next stop, Mr. Henderson's law office. Mr. Henderson's law office was an imposing building of dark brick and glass, a place that smelled of old books, leather, and serious money. He had been Bob's lawyer and closest friend for over 40 years. He was a stern, powerfully built man with a shock of silver hair and the tenacious demeanor of a bulldog. He'd seen Bob through business deals, contract disputes, and finally the drafting of his will. His loyalty to my late husband was absolute. He greeted me with a warm, sad smile, the kind reserved for widows of old friends. "Eleanor, it's good to see you, though I wish it were under better circumstances." He led me into his vast office, the walls lined with law books. That warmth vanished the moment I laid the credit reports on his polished mahogany desk. I told him the entire story, starting with the Thanksgiving dinner and working my way back through the gaslighting, the nurse, the secret credit cards, and finally the denied loan applications. I watched as his face transformed. His folksy kindness hardened into a mask of cold, controlled fury. A muscle in his jaw began to twitch, and his eyes, behind his reading glasses, narrowed into dangerous slits. When I finished, he was silent for a full minute, his big hand steepled in front of him. "The conniving little vulture," he finally growled, his voice a low rumble that seemed to shake the room. "Eleanor, I am so sorry you've been through this alone. Bob would be raising absolute hell right now." He leaned forward, his eyes locking with mine. "But now we're going to raise it for him. And we are going to bury them." For the next 3 hours, his office became a command center. He called in his lead paralegal, a sharp, incredibly efficient young woman named Anna, who immediately began making calls and taking notes. They listened with intense focus as I recounted every detail of the last 2 years, every passive-aggressive comment from Jessica, her absolute control of the Daily Mail, the accidental dead phone, the conveniently spilled glass of water. "The power of attorney," Mr. Henderson said, tapping a thick pen on the desk. "She must have found the old medical one you signed for your surgery. She likely used the personal information on it, your social, your date of birth, to apply for the cards online. It's a common tactic against the elderly. It's sloppy, but it's brazen. She assumed you'd either never find out, or that if you did, no one would believe you." He got on the phone with a private investigator his firm kept on retainer. The investigator, a former police detective, was ruthlessly efficient. Within 24 hours, the ugly puzzle pieces started clicking into place with terrifying speed. The investigator found the P.O. box Jessica had rented at a postal store 2 towns over, paid for in cash. She had then, using a simple online form, filed a change of address with each of the credit card companies, redirecting all statements and correspondence to that secret box, ensuring I would never see the evidence of her spending spree. This wasn't an impulse. This was a calculated, long-term campaign of financial warfare. Mr. Henderson's team subpoenaed the denied home equity loan applications from the banks. Anna called me when they arrived. "You need to see this, Eleanor," she said, her voice tight. I drove to her office. She laid the documents on the conference table. On the signature line of each application was a pathetic, clumsy forgery of my name. It looked like a child's attempt to copy a signature. The only reason these were denied, Anna explained, is because the signatures didn't match the one on file with your original mortgage documents from 30 years ago. The bank's fraud detection software flagged it. They were sloppy. Their greed made them sloppy. Some people might have crumbled under the sheer weight of such a profound, intimate betrayal. But sitting there, in that cold conference room, with the stark black and white evidence of their treachery piled on the table, I didn't feel broken. I felt forged. The fire was meant to destroy me, but it only made me stronger. You're going to want to see what happens when they come to throw me out on December 1st. We spent the rest of the week preparing for battle. Mr. Henderson coached me like a prize fighter. We role-played the confrontation. He told me what to expect, how she would react, what I needed to say, and more importantly, what not to say. Anna, meanwhile, compiled a thick, terrifyingly official-looking binder. It was my arsenal. The deed, the credit reports, the transaction histories, copies of the forged loan applications, the investigator's report on the P.O. box, a sworn affidavit from Maria at the bank, and photos of the rental contract. It was my sword and my shield, all bound in imposing blue vinyl. We also drafted a formal multi-count criminal complaint to be filed with the district attorney's office, detailing felony fraud, grand larceny, identity theft, and financial elder abuse. The charges were serious. Prison time was on the table. The plan was simple and brutal. I would let them walk into the trap. I would let them savor their victory for a few sweet moments. And then I would lower the boom. By the end of the week, I wasn't a scared, grieving widow anymore. I was a client. I was a plaintiff. And I was ready for war. Jessica thought she was coming to evict a helpless old woman. She had no idea she was walking right into a perfectly laid trap. December 1st arrived with a biting wind and a low gray sky that felt like a sheet of lead. I was up before dawn, sitting at my kitchen table in the dark. The house was silent. I had a cup of coffee, its warmth doing little to chase away the chill that had settled deep in my bones. It wasn't fear. It was a cold, hard resolve. The blue binder of evidence sat on the chair beside me like a loyal guard dog. At precisely 9 a.m., just as Mr. Henderson had predicted, a large, grimy moving truck rumbled down my long driveway and stopped with a hiss of its air brakes. The name Swift Movers was painted on the side in faded red letters. A few minutes later, Jessica's pristine white luxury SUV pulled in behind it, blocking any chance of retreat. She emerged from the driver's side, a vision of suburban triumph in a stylish camel-colored coat, a smug, victorious smirk playing on her lips. She was followed by two burly men in matching blue jumpsuits who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. She didn't bother to knock. I heard the familiar click of her key in the lock, an act of ownership that sent a fresh jolt of anger through me. She strode into my kitchen, her expensive boots clicking on the tile floor. "Well, good morning, Eleanor," she chirped, her voice dripping with the kind of false cheer that curdles milk. "I see you're up and dressed. Good. It'll make this whole process much smoother. These gentlemen are from Swift Movers. They'll have your things packed up and out of here in a jiffy. You just point them to your room." The two movers stood awkwardly in the doorway, their eyes darting around the room, looking anywhere but at me. I stayed seated, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. "That won't be necessary," I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the tense silence. "You can tell the gentlemen to go wait in their truck. They won't be moving anything today." One of the movers, the younger one, visibly relaxed and took a half-step back. Jessica's smile tightened into a thin, ugly line. "Oh, don't be difficult, Eleanor. Let's not make this harder than it has to be. We have a full day scheduled. My decorator is coming at noon to measure your room for built-in bookshelves for my new home office." "I don't think so," I said. I stood up slowly. I walked over to the blue binder, picked it up, and placed it on the kitchen table with a solid, definitive thud that echoed in the quiet room. She eyed the binder, a flicker of confusion in her cold eyes. "What's that? Did you pack your photo albums already?" "Actually," I said, flipping open the cover to the first plastic-sleeved page. "It's a copy of the deed to this house." I turned the binder around so she was forced to look at it. I tapped the bottom of the page with my finger. "The house that was fully paid off in 2012. The house that is legally and solely in my name, and the name of my late husband. The smug color began to drain from her face, replaced by a blotchy, pale confusion. That's ridiculous. David and I have been paying the mortgage. Paying what, Jessica? A phantom. I cut her off, my voice as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. I flipped the page with a snap. And this is particularly interesting. This is a detailed credit report. I pulled out the separate statements, fanning them out like a poker hand. The Platinum Visa. The Premier MasterCard. The Gold American Express. All opened by you in my name, totaling nearly $30,000 in fraudulent charges for your new kitchen, your new furniture, your Hawaiian vacation. I saw her eyes widen in pure animal panic. She took an involuntary step back. And now, I said, my voice dropping lower, for the grand finale. I turned to the final section of the binder. I pulled out the enlarged, damning copy of the home equity loan application and slid it across the granite countertop until it stopped right in front of her. Her pathetic, childish attempt at my signature was circled in bright red ink. This is a felony, Jessica. It's called bank fraud. It carries a sentence of up to 30 years in federal prison. I let that sink in. The movers had now fully retreated to the doorway, their expressions a mixture of shock and fear. They knew they had walked into something far more serious than a simple move. And this, I said, tapping the thick blue binder, is the official notarized criminal complaint my lawyer has prepared for the district attorney's office, detailing every single crime you've committed against me for the last 2 years. Identity theft, mail fraud, grand larceny, and financial elder abuse. She was speechless, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, but no sounds came out. Her face was a pale, horrified mask. She looked from the damning papers to my face, and for the first time she saw me. Not the timid, grieving old woman she thought she could manipulate and discard, but someone she had never met before. I leaned forward across the table, my eyes locked on hers. And now, here are the 6 words I promised you at Thanksgiving. I said them slowly, deliberately, each word a hammer blow. Get out of my damn house. Just then, David rushed in from the garage holding a roll of packing tape. Jess? What's taking so long? The movers are just standing. He stopped dead, his eyes taking in the scene. His wife's terrified face, the mountain of official-looking papers on the table, and the look of cold, righteous fury on his mother's face. What's going on? He stammered, his gaze flicking between us. Your wife is a thief and a fraud, I said, never taking my eyes off Jessica. And you, David, are her willing accomplice. You have 30 minutes to pack your personal belongings, the things you actually own, and get off my property. If you are not gone by then, my lawyer, Mr. Henderson, will personally walk this binder into the DS office and file it. The clock is ticking. As I watched them scramble, a hurricane of their own making, I didn't feel triumph. I felt a profound, aching sadness for the son I had lost. But the time for grief was over. The time for justice had just begun. The 30 minutes I gave them stretched into a chaotic, venomous hour. I remained at my kitchen table, a silent, unmoving sentinel, nursing a fresh cup of coffee as they tore through the house like panicked animals. The air grew thick with their whispered, furious arguments, sounds that were far uglier than any shouting match. I heard Jessica hiss at David in their bedroom, her voice a snake's whisper. You told me she was a clueless old woman. You told me her mind was going. You let this happen. I heard the sound of a drawer being yanked out and crashing to the floor. I heard David's pathetic, whimpering replies. I didn't know she had a lawyer. How was I supposed to know? The worst part was hearing my grandchildren. Chloe, who was old enough to understand that something terrible was happening, was crying softly in her room. I heard her ask her father, Daddy, why is Grammy so mad? Where are we going? David's mumbled, incoherent answer was lost in the sound of Jessica snapping at him to just pack the damn bags. That sound, the sound of my granddaughter's confusion and fear, was the sharpest pain of all. It was a reminder of the innocent lives caught in the wreckage of their parents' greed. Finally, they were gone. The swift movers' truck, which had been hired to haul away my life, was instead loaded with their designer furniture, oversized television, and boxes of expensive clothes and toys. They didn't even make eye contact with me as they scurried out the door. I watched from my bay window as Jessica's white SUV tore out of the driveway, spitting gravel. David's car followed a moment later, trailing behind like a beaten dog. The silence they left behind was vast and absolute. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The very first thing I did was call a 24-hour locksmith. As a kind, burly man named Gus methodically changed every single lock on every door, I called Mr. Henderson. "They're gone," I said, my voice hoarse. "Good," he replied, his voice calm and professional. "Phase 1 is complete. Now steel yourself for Phase 2. A cornered rat will bite Eleanor. She's not going to go down without a fight." He was right. 2 days later, a process server knocked on my newly secured front door. He handed me a thick envelope. Jessica had filed for an emergency temporary conservatorship over me. It was an audacious, desperate gambit. The legal documents were a work of fiction, claiming I was suffering from severe senile dementia and paranoid delusions. Her sworn declaration stated that my violent and irrational act of throwing them out was definitive proof that I was a danger to myself and incapable of managing my own affairs. She had attached a signed, notarized statement from Susan, the home care assessment nurse, detailing her grave professional concerns about my disorientation and memory loss. She even included a dramatic, fabricated account of the spilled glass of water, painting it as a near-fatal incident for my granddaughter. The audacity of it, the sheer, unmitigated gall, stole my breath. Even after being caught red-handed in fraud and theft, she was doubling down, trying to use the very system designed to protect people like me to strip me of my rights and my freedom. For a moment, a flicker of the old fear returned. What if a judge believed her? What if they saw my age and just assumed I was incompetent? But then Mr. Henderson's voice echoed in my head. "Let her. Every lie she tells is another nail in her own coffin." We met her petition in a sterile, impersonal courtroom the following week. It was a preliminary hearing, not the full criminal trial. Jessica was there with a slick, expensive-looking lawyer. She was dressed in a conservative navy blue suit, her face a mask of worried concern. She looked every bit the devoted daughter-in-law, forced to take this drastic, painful step for the good of her beloved mother-in-law. She even managed to produce a few glistening tears as her lawyer spoke. Her lawyer presented their case, painting a picture of my sudden tragic mental decline. He presented the nurse's report. He presented Jessica's tearful testimony. It was a convincing performance. Then it was Mr. Henderson's turn. He stood up, his bulldog-like frame radiating a calm, absolute confidence. He didn't just refute their claims. He systematically and brutally demolished them. For every lie he had a truth. "They claim Mrs. Vance is mentally incompetent," he boomed, his voice filling the courtroom. "Your Honor, I present a letter from Dr. Alan Peterson, Mrs. Vance's personal physician of 20 years, attesting to her excellent mental and physical health as of an examination conducted just last week." He placed the letter on the judge's bench. "They claim Mrs. Vance is paranoid," he continued. "I present the sworn affidavit of Ms. Maria Flores, a personal banker, who will testify that Mrs. Vance was calm, clear-headed, and rational when she came to the bank to investigate what turned out to be nearly $30,000 in fraudulent debt accrued in her name." He placed the affidavit next to the letter. "And as for the petitioner's deep concern for Mrs. Vance's financial well-being," Mr. Henderson said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "I present copies of 3 credit card statements and 2 forged home equity loan applications." He placed my big blue binder on the judge's bench with a thud that seemed to shake the room. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s with eyes that missed nothing, spent several minutes silently reading the documents. The silence was deafening. Finally, she looked up, staring directly at Jessica over the top of her spectacles. Her voice was laced with ice. "Ma'am," she said, "your petition is not only denied, it is offensively frivolous. You have wasted this court's time with what appears to be a malicious and fraudulent attempt to cover up your own significant criminal activity. I would strongly advise your attorney to prepare for a very different kind of court appearance in the near future. This hearing is concluded." Jessica's face crumpled. The mask of concern was gone. All that was left was ugly, impotent rage. That evening my phone rang. It was Sarah, then Linda, a cousin who had been at the Thanksgiving dinner, and had been subpoenaed by Mr. Henderson to give a statement, Had called them and told them everything. Their voices were choked with sobs, with apologies, with a deep gut-wrenching shame. "Mom, I'm so sorry," Sarah cried, her own voice breaking. "I should have listened. I never should have doubted you. I am so ashamed of myself." I listened. I accepted their apologies. But I knew and they knew that the easy, unconditional trust we once shared was a fragile, shattered thing. It would take a long time to rebuild it, if it ever could be fully restored. She tried to use my age as a weapon against me, but she forgot one thing. With age comes wisdom, and my legal team was armed with enough truth to bury her completely. The 3 months leading up to the criminal trial were a strange kind of purgatory. My house was quiet and my own again, but a dark cloud loomed on the horizon. I spent countless hours with the prosecutors from the district attorney's office. They were tough, professional, and thankfully, specialized in elder abuse cases. I had to give formal depositions, sitting in a sterile conference room while a court reporter transcribed my every word. It was exhausting and emotionally draining, reliving every calculated slight, every insidious lie, every moment of betrayal. But with each telling, the story became less a source of personal pain and more a cold, hard weapon of fact. I was no longer just telling my story. I was building the cage that would hold my tormentor. The day of the trial, I walked into the courthouse with Marge on one side and my brother-in-law Tom on the other. They were my small, steadfast army. My daughters had offered to fly in and stand with me, but I had told them no. This was my fight to finish. I needed to do it on my own 2 feet. Jessica was already there, sitting beside her lawyer. She was dressed in a ridiculously expensive-looking cream-colored suit, her hair perfectly coiffed. She looked like she was attending a charity luncheon, not a felony trial. She tried to project an aura of wronged innocence, but I could see the panic flickering in her eyes whenever she thought no one was looking. David sat a few rows behind her, looking gray and shrunken, a ghost haunting his own life. Jessica's defense was as predictable as it was insulting. Her lawyer, a slick man with a practiced, sympathetic voice, tried to paint me as a bitter, lonely, and confused old woman. He argued I was jealous of my daughter-in-law's successful career and her happy family. He claimed I was resentful of her modernizing my dated home. He had the gall to suggest that the credit cards were a terrible misunderstanding, a misguided attempt on Jessica's part to help me manage my finances because I was so forgetful. He argued that I had given her verbal permission to use my name and had simply forgotten in a fit of age-related pique. When I took the stand, he came at me with that same smarmy, condescending tone. "Mrs. Vance," he began, "you've raised 3 children, run a household for 50 years. That's a lot of stress. Isn't it true that, at your age, you sometimes find yourself misplacing things? Forgetting conversations? Isn't it possible you just forgot giving Jessica permission?" I took a deep breath. I didn't look at him. I looked directly at the jury. They were 12 ordinary people, a mechanic, a schoolteacher, a retired postal worker, people who understood the value of $1 and the meaning of trust. "My memory is perfectly fine," I said, my voice clear and steady, echoing slightly in the quiet courtroom. "I remember the smell of the turkey I was cooking on the day your client called me a freeloader in my own home. I remember the exact look on my grandchildren's faces when their mother screamed at them to pack their things. And I can tell you with 100% certainty that I did not give her permission to steal $30,000 from me, and then try to take out a loan against my home. Some things, sir, a mother does not forget." The prosecution then began its methodical presentation of the case. It was an avalanche of irrefutable evidence. The bank records, the credit card statements, the testimony of the forensic handwriting expert who confirmed the forgeries were amateurish but definitive. The private investigator took the stand and detailed his discovery of the secret P.O. box. The whole sordid story was laid bare for the jury to see, not as a misunderstanding, but as a cold, calculated crime. The most pathetic and damning part of the trial was David's testimony. As part of a plea deal that would keep him out of prison, he had agreed to testify against his wife. He shuffled to the stand, a man hollowed out by his own weakness. He tried to portray himself as her victim, a loving, naive husband who was manipulated and controlled by a domineering, ambitious woman. He claimed he had no idea about the extent of her fraud, that he thought she was using her own inheritance to pay for the renovations. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Ms. Davies, let him tell his story. And then she eviscerated him. "Mr. Vance," she said, holding up a bank statement. "This is your personal debit card statement from last May. Can you explain this charge for $800 at Designs by Franco? The same interior decorator your wife hired for the kitchen remodel?" David stammered. I thought she paid me back. "And these charges," Ms. Davies continued relentless, "at the same high-end restaurants your wife charged to your mother's fraudulent credit card, on the same nights. Were you tricked into eating those meals as well?" She produced emails between him and Jessica where they discussed the income stream, from renting my room, and how they could finally afford their trip to Hawaii. He crumbled under the weight of his own lies, finally admitting through choked sobs that he knew about the cards, that he knew it was wrong, but that he was too scared of his wife to stop her. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. When they filed back in, the foreman, a large man with weary eyes, stood up and refused to look at Jessica. "On the charge of felony financial fraud, we the jury find the defendant, Jessica Vance, guilty." He repeated the word guilty like a death knell for every single charge. A strangled cry escaped Jessica's lips. David just sobbed uncontrollably, his head in his hands. I felt a wave of something wash over me. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't joy. It was a quiet, heavy, necessary finality. Justice. As the bailiffs moved to cuff her, Jessica turned and screamed at me, her face a twisted mask of pure venom. "You did this. You ruined our family. You vindictive old hag." I met her gaze and said nothing. But in the quiet of my own heart, I answered her. "No, my dear. You did all of this yourself. I just turned on the lights." The gavel fell, and the sound echoed the breaking of my family. But as they led my son's wife away, I knew it was also the sound of my own chains being shattered forever. In the weeks that followed the sentencing, a profound and unfamiliar quiet settled over the house. Jessica was sentenced to 7 years in a state penitentiary for women. The judge had been particularly harsh, citing her lack of remorse and her predatory targeting of a vulnerable family member. David, for his pathetic cooperation, received 3 years of probation, 500 hours of community service at a senior center, a cruel irony that was not lost on me, and a court-ordered restitution plan that would garnish his wages for decades to come. Every month, a small court-mandated check arrives in my mailbox. It's not about the money. It's a constant, tangible reminder that actions have consequences. The house was finally, completely, and blessedly mine again. But it felt tainted. The ghost of her ambition and his weakness lingered in every room. I'd look at the gleaming new kitchen countertops and see only the greasy fingerprints of deceit. I'd sit on the expensive modern sofa in the living room and feel only the sting of betrayal. I couldn't live with their ghosts. I couldn't heal in a space they had poisoned. So, I started cleaning house in the most literal and figurative way possible. I called an estate sale company. 2 women came in with pricing guns and little yellow tags. They went through the house, room by room, tagging every piece of furniture, every high-tech appliance, every decorative vase and soulless piece of art that Jessica had bought with my stolen credit. 2 weeks later, I sat in my bedroom and listened as a river of strangers flowed through my home, carting away the remnants of her materialistic dream. I kept nothing. Not a single lamp, not a single throw pillow. The money from the sale, a considerable sum, I wrote out in a single check and donated it to the local charity that provides free legal aid to seniors facing abuse and exploitation. It felt like turning poison into medicine, like taking the ugliest chapter of my life and using it to help someone else write a better one. My days found a new quiet rhythm. I started volunteering at that very same charity 3 days a week. I wouldn't offer legal advice, of course, but I would sit with men and women my age and older, and I would listen. I listened to stories that were heartbreakingly similar to my own. Stories of children who saw their aging parents as walking ATMs, of relatives who manipulated love and trust into loans that were never meant to be repaid. I told them my story not for sympathy, but as a cautionary tale, a roadmap of red flags. I urged them, check your credit reports. Put your house in a trust. Never, ever let anyone make you feel ashamed for wanting to protect what is rightfully yours. They called me a warrior. I just felt like a survivor. 6 months after the trial, a letter arrived. It was from David. It was long and rambling, filled with the kind of therapeutic jargon that speaks of accountability without truly feeling it. He wrote about his shame, his codependency, his fear of his wife. He begged to see me, to have a chance to begin the process of making amends. For weeks, the letter sat on my kitchen counter. Marge said, "Use it as a fire starter." Tom said, "He's still your son, Eleanor. You only get one." In the end, I agreed to meet him. Not for him. For me. I needed to close the chapter. We met at a neutral public coffee shop downtown. He looked terrible. He was thinner, with dark circles under his eyes. The arrogance he had acquired during his marriage to Jessica was gone, replaced by a haunted, weary look. He stood up when I walked in, and for a moment I saw the little boy I used to tuck into bed. He cried as soon as I sat down. He apologized profusely. He said all the right things, the things his therapist had likely coached him to say. When he finished, his tear-streaked face hopeful, I took a slow sip of my tea. "I forgive you, David," I said, and I saw a wave of relief wash over him. I held up my hand before he could speak. "But I need you to understand exactly what that means. I forgive you for my peace, not for your absolution. It means I am choosing to let go of the anger because it is a poison, and I refuse to drink it for another day. It does not mean I forget. It does not mean I trust you. The relationship we had, the sacred bond between a mother and the son she adored, that relationship died on Thanksgiving Day when you sat in silence and let your wife call me a freeloader. It's gone, David. You and she killed it. And it's never coming back." I stood up, leaving my full cup of tea on the table. "I will be civil at family holidays. For the sake of the grandchildren. I will send them birthday cards. But you and we are no longer family in that way. We are simply related." I walked out of that coffee shop and didn't look back. I left him sitting there, a stranger with my son's face. It was the hardest, most painful thing I had ever done, and the most necessary thing to truly and finally reclaim my life. It's been a full year now. A full year since the gavel fell and the dust began to settle. My house is no longer quiet. It's filled with a different kind of life, a better kind. The soulless, modern furniture is gone, replaced by comfortable pieces I've picked out at antique shops and flea markets. Pieces that have a story. My home feels like my own again. Marge and I have a standing wine and Scrabble night every Thursday. She always wins, but I make a better cheese plate. Tom comes over on Saturdays to help me with the rose bushes Bob planted, and we talk about the old days. My daughters, Sarah and Linda, have been making a real, tangible effort. They call, not out of a sense of guilty obligation, but with genuine interest in my life. They flew in for my 71st birthday, and we spent the weekend cooking in my kitchen, laughing and looking through old photo albums. It's not perfect. There's a scar on our family that will never fully fade. But we are rebuilding slowly, carefully, with a newfound honesty. My grandchildren, Chloe and Leo, are living with Jessica's sister, a kind woman who is thankfully nothing like her. By court order, David's visits with them are still supervised. I see them on holidays. It's awkward sometimes. They are confused. But I am trying to be the constant, stable presence they so desperately need. I hope one day, when they're older and can understand the complexities of adult failure, they'll know the whole story. I hope they'll understand that this was never about punishing them. It was about an old woman who refused to be erased. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, I sit in my bay window, with a cup of tea, and I look out at my yard. I think about the last few years. I think about how close I came to losing everything. They tried to turn my golden years into a living nightmare, to shrink my world down to a single sad room in a nursing home. But they failed. They only succeeded in teaching me how to roar. This house isn't just wood and nails and property taxes anymore. It's a monument to my survival. It stands for every senior, every mother, every woman who has ever been underestimated, who has been made to feel small or foolish or like a burden. It is a testament that it is never, ever too late to fight for yourself. Thank you for listening to my story. I know it's been a long and difficult journey, but I felt it was important to share, from beginning to end. Now, I have a question for all of you watching. What's one piece of advice your younger self needed to hear about setting boundaries with family? Let us all learn from each other in the comments below. Your wisdom could be the lifeline someone else needs to read today. And if my story resonated with you, please give this video a like and subscribe for more stories about finding your strength when you need it most. My story found its justice, but I know so many others are still being fought. If you or someone you love has ever been made to feel like a burden by the very people you raised, share your story in the comments. Let's create a chorus so loud that it can't be ignored. You are not invisible. You are not a burden. And you are not alone.